It's all happening on the show tonight. We're back in Westminster for the latest hokey-cokey on the Rwanda bill. I'll be telling you why I think the Church of England has given up on Christianity. And we've got the latest evidence that there really is a Loch Ness Monster. This is the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Don't you dare go anywhere. Now, in a fresh blow to the Tory party, the House of Lords has inflicted new defeats on the government over its flagship Rwanda bill. 7 proposed changes, including a provision to ensure due regard for domestic and international law, were passed by the peers. MPs will now have to vote on the bill again, delaying the passage of it until after Easter. Down in Westminster, the Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Sabey, is hanging around trying to find out what on earth is going on with this. I suppose we can stop calling it flagship Rwanda bill, for the moment at least, Ryan. Once again, those who said that this would all be done and dusted this week might be said to have been wrong again.
Yeah, there's absolutely no chance of this legislation getting royal assent by the end of the week. Interestingly, the government, it seems, haven't tabled or given it any time until before Easter. So this will drag itself on until middle of April, when the legislation will eventually get passed. But when MPs do consider it again, there'll be those 7 amendments that will be attached to it. And we're into that, in that phrase, we keep calling it the ping pong between the 2 houses. That's exactly where we are. And it'll be the MPs who will then send it back to the House of Lords to actually get the Lords to think again on this.
And the sort of the bare bones of what has been voted in by the Lords tonight is something that will presumably please the lawyers and upset the rights of the Tory party.
Yeah, that's right. So the legislation or the amendments that they put onto it is to adhere to international and domestic law. But what the Tory ministers have been calling these wrecking amendments, they'd be wrecking the bill. So eventually the Lords will back down. Now, the majorities on those votes have reduced a little bit, but not enough. So they'll go back to the 2 MPs who'll then strip them bare again, and it will go back to the Lords. And what we can probably expect to happen is, as we saw, there were 10 amendments first of all, then there were 7 that were voted on. You just wonder whether the Lords will bring it down to 2 or 3 next time. But eventually they will give in. They will not stand in the way or throw obstacles in the way of this legislation. It will get passed, but that is just being put back until probably mid-April, last week of April.
Yeah, so into the summer term, effectively, really, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. But I think it plays into... I don't think you'll get too many people in Conservative circles say this too loudly, but I think it may play into the Conservative hands slightly, because by delaying it, it's just going to be a few days or so before those May elections. And I think if you can say that you've got the royal assent to your, as we just mentioned a few minutes ago, the flagship legislation, it's going to play into your hands slightly. And it shows that you're actually getting on with something. Rishi Sunak will say he's had the tenacity to make sure that he's stuck along with this legislation and actually finally got it passed. And he can look to seeing those flights eventually get off the ground in about probably, it looks like it will probably be mid-June now, if there are no legal challenges on an individual basis.
Just in time for the school holidays. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Ryan Sabey down there in Westminster trying to report on the never-ending saga, which is now, of course, the Rwanda safety bill. With me now in the studio, Candice Holdsworth, the journalist, Telegraph's Annabel Denham, and barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. Welcome to all of you. I don't know how much longer I can put up with any more conversations about Rwanda. What I can say is there was also a 1922 committee meeting tonight, which we are reliably informed by sources in the Tory party. Rishi Sunak got a great big standing ovation and lots of people banging desks, and it was all wonderful. But what I can also tell you was there was a guy stabbed on a dinghy coming across the channel today. Hundreds of people arrived in Dover. And also there's a moment on video, which we might be able to see later, of a boat actually full of many migrants, about 60 migrants, basically being moved out of French waters by the people driving it, away from French Coast Guard ships towards the RNLI. So nothing is ever going to change in this situation, is it?
No, and I just, you know, what Rishi Sunak is trying to do is he's trying to create the biggest disincentive possible to break the model of the human traffickers.
Yeah.
Do you make it impossible for people? They have to know, if I pay my money, if I give my money to this trafficker, I am not going to get entry into the UK.
Right.
You know,
And it's a waste of time.
And that's one way of doing it. You manage people's incentives. I mean, Keir Starmer wants to do it another way. He wants to tackle the traffickers directly. But how practical is that?
Right.
And I just wonder what position it would leave him in if, in the most optimistic scenario imaginable, flights do start taking off from June. People are quite happy with it. Would he then reverse that policy?
Well, I have no idea what Keir Starmer will do because Keir Starmer won't tell us, Annabel, will he?
I'm not sure Keir Starmer knows what Keir Starmer will do. He'll probably stick his finger in the air, see what the public mood is like, and then later decide. Look, I think that everybody's getting tired of the Rwanda bill. Now we're going to have this ping-pong between the House of Commons and the House of Lords. I think that this was inevitable. Like Ryan says, in some way this does play into the government's hand. The timing of the bill getting over the line could be good as the Tories go into May elections that they are expecting to be very breezing indeed. I think it's also an opportunity for Rishi to present himself as, or present it as being the Tories versus Labour. Labour are the ones who are trying to thwart this. Labour are the ones who haven't come up with a coherent plan for how they're going to stop the boats. So there really would be some symbolism if we were to see some planes getting off the ground.
And we saw a bit of that in
later in spring.
I mean, I'm not sure anybody cares anymore at this point, though. You know, even if they get 50 people onto a plane or 100 people or even 200 people onto a plane, they know that at the other end there's only room for about 500 people anyway. But I saw Keir Starmer was being attacked for that by Sunak today in Prime Minister's Questions, where he accused him of being the guy that likes to stop dangerous criminals from being deported from this country because, of course, he famously signed that letter, didn't he, for the rapist and the murderer who then came back in and murdered some more people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is the typical political ping-pong with more pong than ping.
Yeah.
And this is what's going to happen. There's a lot of pong. And I think that's the reality of this. And as you say, what happens is at least there's a plan. Piers Morgan will lose his £1,000 bet. There will be at least one plane that takes off.
You keep saying that, but I'm not sure you're right about that.
Well,
Piers Morgan wins most of his bets.
Well, he won't win this one because it's going to happen, and I do think it's going to inevitable. Probably around June time, they're going to get it through, and it'll be a win, it'll be a tick for Rishi on that sort of basis. But absolutely, as Candice said, the reality is what they're trying to do is stop the traffickers in the first place. It's not to send people to Rwanda; it's to make it so unattractive that they don't come in the first place. And if we look at that and need to,
and that's not ever going to be the case the way things are going because we're spending more and more money housing them. We just had the auditors saying that actually housing them in hotels is probably the cheapest option.
Yes,
and you're kind of going, oh great, so we can't put them in sort of formerly barracks or old army camps because that's going to cost even more.
That's just so typical, and it seems like a slightly boring subject, but procurement is such an issue for government. I mean, we saw it during the pandemic as well. You know, they want to move quickly, so they just, grab people on board and they don't think about costs and they underestimate how much they'll need, and it's such a typical story, and it's one thing that I think Rachel Reeves has said, no one really pays attention to it, but she says that's one thing she wants to reform, how government procures things.
Yes.
But I think
wasteful.
I mean, I have my suspicions that there might be more to it than that. That there are a lot of staff, civil servants who work in the Home Office, who would like our asylum system to be more generous, who do not seem to regard accommodation which was fit for brave military force personnel to live in, but they don't seem to view that as acceptable for migrants who've crossed the Channel illegally.
So they would have to spend more money doing them up.
There perhaps is an incentive there for Home Office staff who would like to have a more generous system in place to drive up the costs, or at least not try to bring down the costs as much as possible. So no wonder hotels are going to be cheaper. But obviously, you talked about the pull factor. A big problem is that if the perception is that by coming here in a dinghy, perhaps across the Channel, you will then be put up in a rather nice Airbnb, a B&B, then that word will get around, and that might make the UK a more attractive place. That's not to say, of course, that all illegal migrants who are coming here are economic migrants. Many of them, of course, are fleeing war-torn countries where they may be persecuted. But there does appear, look at the numbers, to be some abuse of our asylum system.
I think there's a huge amount of abuse. And I think also a lot of people are not paying necessarily to come over, but they're being sort of hooked in by these gangmasters and they're being recruited effectively to come here and work in the black market or in criminal activities. And so they don't pay, but what they do is they get sort of indentured and they get sort of, almost like treated like slaves, and they get told, when you get to Britain, you're going to work for us, and then you'll pay off your debt to us, and that will go on for years and years and years. And I think that's the problem.
And it's absolutely horrendous, and that's why we need to put the focus on the traffickers, and that's the whole thing. It's not sending people to Rwanda. It's basically to act as that deterrent. But people need to sort of spot that and call that out. But that's the reality. There's all sorts of people. I think the FT said it's going to cost about 250,000 per person, they worked out, to send them to Rwanda.
Yeah.
The figures are crazy. What we need to stop is stop those gangs.
Yes.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they make so much money that it's never going to stop because, like the drug business in this country, you know, there's an awful lot of people that use drugs, and so there's an awful lot of people paying good money to these people to continue to bring the drugs in. And for the same reason, there's an awful lot of money in moving people around the world, and they're doing it all over the world. So I don't know what you do about it.
I mean, Australia claimed that they managed to pretty much eliminate the problem. So,
yeah,
I mean,
but Australia is a long way away from anywhere, and so to come there on a boat is not quite as easy as it is, say, to come here from France. And if you're going to set off from, you know, Southeast Asia in a boat on some very treacherous seas, it's a very different ballgame.
So that's something you have to think about.
So I think the problem for us is the proximity.
Yes.
To Normandy, basically.
Well, it's the proximity and also the message, as we say.
Yeah.
The message has to be, you're not going to stay here.
Right.
You're sent to Rwanda. Actually, this is the reality about what happens when you come here. It's not staying in a nice hotel. You're going to be put into slavery, some of these people. And they're horrendous conditions. If we can work on that PR story to make sure that gets infiltrated, that's going to be more powerful than all the other stuff.
Well, there was a story in the Daily Mail, I don't know if you saw it recently, a man who tried to come here from Iran.
Yes.
And he said that he was pretty much told by the traffickers, aim for Britain, don't aim for France.
Right.
And then he came here and was completely disillusioned by it, and now he's actually claiming asylum in France.
Right.
So, I mean, people do have these sort of unrealistic expectations of what things are going to be like when they get here.
Yeah, I'm sure, but nevertheless, it's probably better than wherever they're coming from, right? So
Well,
why wouldn't
one certainly, yeah, exactly. One certainly expects so. Even if they're coming here as economic migrants, they're doing so in the pursuit of a better life for themselves and for their families. But Australia has shown us that offshore processing, that a scheme like Rwanda can act as a deterrent. My concern is that the numbers who will be sent there, like we've discussed, are going to be so tiny as a proportion of the whole that it's not going to make any difference. And again, that's why it benefits the government that this is being delayed and delayed and delayed, because it's not going to have a measurable impact on the number of people who want to come to Britain, you know, illegally and claim asylum. But what it will do is be a very symbolic moment for the Tories to show people that this totemic policy.
If it actually happens, let's have a look at a bit of Prime Minister's questions today, because we've got Keir Starmer, I think, calling for an election.
Let's just take his Rwanda policy. When they first announced this gimmick, they claimed it would settle tens of thousands of people. The Home Office then whittled it down to a mere 300. 4 times that number have already arrived this month, and the backlog stands at 130,000. Can the Prime Minister see any flaw in his plan to deport less than 1% of that backlog?
I mean, it's right, isn't it? I mean, the trouble is, even if it does work, and Annabel, I can see that you're hopeful that it might be something that will work. I just don't see it making a jot of difference at all. I mean, Prime Minister's questions today was described as a place where everybody's just run out of things to say. They've run out of jokes. Apparently, something was actually said by Keir Starmer that was quite funny, where he basically said that, you know, the sword of Damocles is literally hanging over the Prime Minister. In actual real terms, in terms of the Leader of the House of Commons. Of course, Penny Mordaunt has got the actual sword.
And he nicked that joke, actually, a couple of days ago, and I think it was the Standard. There was that cartoon.
Right.
The reality is this, and the biggest gift to the Conservatives is that is for Rishi Sunak to turn around and say, look, we're trying to do something, and Labour are stopping us. And if they've got no credible plans, that's a gift for them on that sort of basis. The whole point about Rwanda, as you say, it's supposed to be a deterrent to make people not go to Rwanda, but to stop the criminals. If there can be some progress, that's got to be good for them.
But it's a bit like the SNP strategy when Alex Salmond was in charge in Scotland, when he used to just completely blame Westminster for everything.
Yes.
The last thing you ever wanted to happen was to actually get independence.
Oh, no,
and then have gone,
absolutely.
oh, God, well, we actually have to work with it now. You know, it was much better for him to get up every day and say, those horrible people in Westminster keep stopping our great plans.
Well, absolutely.
No, and at some point, Labour are going to have to set out a coherent agenda. There is no meat on the bones of what they are promising voters at the moment, certainly not when it comes to their plans for illegal migration. Yes. But I think Rwanda is important, not just in terms of getting those planes off the ground, acting as a deterrent, but also because so many voters, people particularly who voted for Brexit, feel very betrayed by the Conservative Party on immigration, legal and illegal.
Yes.
And they want to see tough action action taken.
Yes.
They want it to be shown that we have taken back control of our borders, that we are a sovereign nation, that we are abiding by our sovereign laws, by laws set in Parliament rather than those by some supranational European body. And at the moment, they just simply don't have confidence that that's what's happening.
Well, they can't, because apart from anything else, about over 1 million people a year are being invited into work and to study. So, you know, we don't have control, really. Well, we could have, but we don't.